Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics to set up earmuffs real quick, Tom, week 6 in the OUA. Tom, we're on the tail end of this marathon of a podcasting week that you and I have had. As always, how the heck are you doing? Have you been supplementing with a little extra vitamin C here, getting a little more OJ in, doing a little maybe a sauna, something like that to kind of how are you staying fresh in the wake of 5 hours of podding on Monday night and we're just, back at it right here and now, just doing what we do and getting after it.
Listen, rest and relaxation is key, my friend. You got to make sure that you're stretching afterwards, do a little bit of vocal cord training. I like to sing myself and just make sure that the cords are nice and warm right before I come on here. So I'm ready and raring to go. We're keeping in shape here, and we're, how do you say, wordsmiths. And not just wordsmiths, but word trainers, really.
I love it. I'm going to have to get that printed on a shirt as well with some of the other swag that might be coming our way in the near future. Once again, just shout out to everyone kind of just following along with our journey here in this OUA season. As Tom, as you said so perfectly at the end of one of the last podcasts, who knows which one, but just it makes it so much, it makes it that much more enjoyable than it already is for us, kind of knowing that, we have, however many people out there just kind of along for the ride with us. But it's a pretty straightforward pod that we have. We're obviously now kind of crossing into the second half of the regular season. And obviously there are two massive games on this slate this weekend that are certainly drawing the ire, or drawing the attention, I should say, of, folks around the OUA. But we start with battle here in the 6 where we get your McMaster Marauders, Tom, taking on the U of T Blues. So we're sitting here at week 6, Tom, and if we went in the Wayback Machine when, it was you, Jack, and I recording, or just you and I doing through our tiers, if I were to tell you going to week 6 that we would have this battle, because this certainly was a week or a game from this week that we were looking at, given sort of where we projected these two teams to be at. We obviously can recall that game these two teams had at the end of last season, which was win and you're in, and thinking that, well, hey, based on everything we've seen from these teams and where they're at and who's kind of stepping up and everything like that, they probably won't be too far apart. Well, fact of the matter is they aren't too far apart because we have Mac at 1-4 right now and Toronto at 0-4. The stats are appalling for each of these teams offensively when you go through it. And it's, I guess, I'll pass it to you like this. And you being the Mac guy, I probably know what your answer is, but it is one of those more surprising than the other, or more disappointing that we have these teams with these just subpar records right now?
Well, obviously, looking at McMaster, it's certainly disappointing there. But quite honestly, I'm disappointed with both teams, really. I was really, really looking forward to Toronto getting back on track and kind of following up the season that they had last year. They go 2 years in a row with getting into the playoffs. With obviously the COVID season, they hosted a playoff game in how many years, which was just so exciting. And like you and I have said on multiple occasions, just knowing that Toronto football is back on the map, it just brings us such joy. The number one thing that I want more than anything in the future, and we not only need some help from the teams on the field, but the OUA off the field, but could you imagine downtown Toronto night game playoff atmosphere? Oh my God, no better spot in all of OUA, in my opinion, in that scenario. That is the goal that I want to get to. And obviously Toronto not being where they need to be this year, I don't think that's going to happen. And obviously the struggles that you and I have had with the OUA in terms of their scheduling as well, that's another conversation. Yeah. But no, I think both of these squads here are certainly not where they thought that they would be or hoped that they would be going into this one.
No, and you know what? In fairness to U of T, when we look at the schedule, we have Guelph and Carleton playing much better than we thought they were going to be doing this year, right? And so, I mean, Carleton obviously was kind of that big question mark for us, and Guelph, a lot of things injury related and just quarterback related that we were wondering about with them. And so you kind of putting those two losses aside, they drop a tight game to Ottawa. We were in attendance for. Obviously, we've seen the ups and downs from the GGs in terms of obviously who's at quarterback for them. And, then they get the game against Queens where, once again, it was kind of tight through the first half and took like that pick six to really get Queens rolling. It's really in the latter half of their schedule that things lighten up for them. And it does kind of start with this game as far as winnable games when we think about, that matchup from last year where it's a lot of the same faces in the similar places, obviously, for Mac. And let's slide over to the Marauders on this standpoint. It was Dewick's last stand last year. That's kind of, wow, actually, you know what? I just got like a chill. That low key kind of makes me sad that loss to U of T was Andreas Dewick's last OUA football game. That's not, as a quarterback, because I think you discovered earlier that he's actually helping out at York or whatever that was. Carleton. Oh, well, yeah. Oh my God. Tristan. It's all making sense. Oh, heck yeah. Go Andreas Dewick. Go Tristan. But all right, we're not talking about Carleton just yet. Okay. Yes, right. Yeah. Oh, amazing. But yeah, I completely lost where I am. But we look at these two teams, and then you think that, okay, they're kind of in the same situation. We thought going into this year they're going to be in perhaps a similar situation, but for perhaps different reasons than where they're at right now. But and so I'll talk about the MAC piece of it because we've been struggling to see them get their offensive mojo going with any consistency, much like we looked at U of T's schedule. A lot of games there for MAC in the early going that, they could have picked up that game against Windsor. They were in that game against Western, which is just, blows my mind after the last couple weeks we've seen. But we talk about getting their offense going. And I hate that U of T's in a position this year where I can, by the numbers and by the games we've had so far, say this with confidence. When you look at just how teams have been playing against U of T, like if Mac can't get it going this week, because hey, Laurier, the best of the best. Guelph, we've really seen them turn things around, that defensive shift and everything like that. And just in general, Mac's had a tough schedule. This is really, say what you want about if them making the playoffs is still plausible, for just salvaging some kind of whatever for Mac. This has to be a not just a win, but they must get things going.
Most definitely. And there's a lot of things that obviously we saw a lot of the same struggles last year that we are seeing this year in terms of the offensive line play and things of that nature. But I think last year, specifically that Toronto game, was kind of the birth, or at least the much more prominent view of this McMaster supposed laid-back attitude in terms of, well, somebody will make a play. When you look back at that Mac Toronto game, Toronto goes out, I believe it was a 2-and-out. Maybe they got one first down on that first drive, but they kick it to Mac, and then they go 88 yards and score a touchdown and look like one of the best that they have in a long time. And then it was almost like they took their foot off the gas. Toronto goes out and they get 3 field goals. Mac gets a field goal of their own in the dying seconds of the first half, and it's 10-9 going into halftime. The only points scored in the second half are 2 Toronto safeties. That's how McMaster loses. That's how Andreas Dewick's playing football career, I should say, comes to an end at McMaster. If that doesn't give you a sour taste in your mouth as a McMaster football player, man, you got to check yourself. I think that this is the opportunity now that you take as a McMaster Marauder, get back on track. You're playing against a Toronto team that, admittedly, their defense showed up at least for a few quarters last game against Carleton. They played pretty well, but the offense has really struggled, obviously, like we saw 20 offensive yards last game, which is insane. Take this opportunity and get better. And don't just, when I say get better, once again, find a different way to get things done on offense. You'll probably be able to be successful against this Toronto team with your base package. You really will. But do something else. Try to get, whether it's Braden Kelly or it's Daniel Bossett, try to get that run game going. Try to switch things up in the pass. Keep Keegan clean. Like, let's just get back to basics, find a rhythm, and just gain some confidence here against this team that knocked you out of the playoffs last year, knocked you out of playoff contention, I should say. So there's going to be that adage of, you know what, now's our time. We got to pay these guys back. Let's do it. Let's get back on track, and let's try to save our season here.
And knocked you out on your home turf at that. And the thing is too, is like, as we said, straight up, without any weird shenanigans in this game, and this ultimately is my pick for this one, that it's going to be Mac on the road at Varsity Stadium. Hey, you like U of T, you're averaging under 10 points a game on offense right now. But then on the flip side, and you talked about all those things of just what you want to see in this one. And if this one does start to look like the Mac York game in some regards, here's my request. Keegan Hall, yes, keep him clean. Keep him in the whole darn game. Mm-hmm. I don't care. Like, as you pointed out when we were talking about him earlier this week, you know, I've seen some of those glimpses. You've obviously gotten to see him through his growth through the high school and OSFL or summer football levels, and obviously the team trusts and the talent with the way that they give him opportunities and with the amount they throw it. Once again, we kind of pitched that question of like, or is it they have this trust for him, or is it just an absolute lack of trust for the run game, or maybe a bit of both? Because then even on their offense, like, it's like, all right, just by the numbers, it's like, well, Max averaging, what is it? They're at 26 points per game. U of T's at 9. Just by that, you'd think that it would, once again, take some pretty significant factors outside of just who we're seeing on the field for this to swing in U of T's favor. But part of that average for Mac is a 71-point win they have against the York Fighting Lions. Because other than that, like, the MVP for this team is Michael Horvat.
Yeah.
Like,
easy.
Without a doubt. Because you take that York game, and then aside from 22 points against Western, like, let's look at it. 17 points against Windsor week 1. And hey, great defense. 22 points against Western week 2. And once again, great defense. And that's actually incredibly impressive on their point. 13 against Guelph, and then we see the outing against Laurier where they're held to 9, and it's just like, on the one hand, yes, you should win this game, put up the big points, but it's kind of actually like what we said, and we'll talk about Queens York because that's obviously one of the games we're going to talk about, but we kind of teased that one coming off of Queens Windsor, where it's like, in some ways, it'll be nice if you're Queens to just get this win today or in a few days on Saturday. Much like for Mac, it'll be nice to get that win. But at the same time, how good, and so I'll pass this last question to you like this, and then we can move on. Like, once again, despite how disappointing Mac's been in the grand scheme of things, they should win this game. For teams, and maybe we'll repeat this commentary when we get to Queens York, teams that are in this position where they're really faltering, and for different reasons for these two clubs, to have games like this where you're playing an opponent where you should be able to beat up on them kind of irrespective of the various situations that have put you in bad spots. Can that actually, like, how good can that actually be for you in terms of kind of bouncing back? Because on the one hand, Mac opens up 0-2, kind of feisty games, disappointing against Windsor with all the sacks and everything like that. Western, what a joy to see them kind of a pick six, a one drive away from maybe winning that game. They beat up on York, and then it's like, okay, that's what they need to go. And then they fell back off the cliff. So in your estimations, and we can repeat this commentary, we can save the Queens part for it when we get to that team, but same kind of idea for Mac. How much can they really gain from winning this? It almost feels like if you beat them by a bunch, it's kind of like, oh, great, you beat up on U of T. They're having having a pretty bad season. But if you don't, it feels like you can't really win if you're Mac in this instance. What do you make of it from that standpoint, Tom?
Yeah, that's a hell of a question, and it's certainly something that we need to kind of go into. Before I jump into that, one thing that I forgot to mention on our review pod that I really wanted to shout out here was Michael Horvat. Now, obviously, he doesn't get on the board in terms of scoring in that Laurier game, but hits the longest punt this year, at least, and the longest one that I can see. At one point, I think it was in the second quarter, maybe the third quarter, he kicks a 78-yard punt to get from their own, like McMaster's own, I think 20 or 30 to Laurier's like 5. Now, he had the win with him, he had a bounce with him, whatever, but oh my God, that was such a phenomenal time. And a big part of the reason why McMaster was close in that game in the first half was because of the field position battle that Michael Horvat was helping them with. So I wanted to give a quick shout out to him because that was one of the best punts I've seen in a very long time. Now, when we're talking about how to go about a game like this, where you very much should win, and there's a lot of times where, like when you even look back at the York game, if Mac only wins against York, like even with everything that we've seen here, if they only win by like 30 points, that's almost a loss because of how much everything else is kind of happening here. And again, I don't want to beat up on York, but I'm using that as an example. When you look at a team like this that you should win against, the way that you use this as a way to continue going forward is you have to get this win and use it as a building block game. Now, what I mean by that is when you're out here, you're not just doing the same thing over and over again that you did against other teams, and you're just trying to squeak away with a win here for like a win-loss. What you want to do is you use this time to try out the plays that you don't necessarily want to, like, hey, I've got a brand new play here and I want to try that out against Western for the first time. If you haven't repped the hell out of that, and obviously playing Western in like week 2, that's not a great time in order to pull something like that out. And now I'm not saying like go trick plays or whatever else, but like maybe you try stretch instead of trying to do toss plays and see how your offensive line works there. Maybe you switch up entirely, and instead of going from a zone run scheme, you do more man, and it's power running, it's trap, it's things of that nature. And you get a chance to see, hey, you know what? Against a team here where, no disrespect to Toronto, but almost everything that Mac does, they should see some kind of success in. Try some other things out, maybe schematically, so that you can try to find a better identity specifically on that offense. Like maybe do you get your receivers a little bit more involved with doing jet sweeps in that, or swing passes, or whatever the case. Use this time, even if, I don't want to say this, but even if you win against Toronto only by like 2 or 3 scores, if you've found something, if you've gleaned, hey, you know what? We run trap better than I've ever seen. This offensive line really seems to respond to a man-style blocking scheme instead of a zone blocking scheme. I think we have something here. And then suddenly you create a scenario where teams have to respect the run again, and no one's teeing off on Keegan Hall anymore, and he's actually got some time and doesn't have to deal with 9 guys in the backfield, in the defensive backfield anyways, and he can actually find some receivers. That would be a massive win to come out of this one.
I think that's a great way to look at it. And in some regards too, I think you have to think about as well, as we kind of said, they should be able to do any variety of things that they can do and have success in this game. But at the same time thinking about, okay, but like once we go up against a more formidable opponent, what are the things that we need to make sure are sharp for those circumstances as well? But as you were saying that, I did just glimpse at their schedule, and this is where it's kind of, they have the Argo Cup, the Battle of Toronto, Red and Blue Bowl the following week. They go to Western the week after that. Woof. They close, big woof. They close out their schedule at home against Waterloo. Like, very best situation right now is looking like they're wrapping up 2-6. And so it's kind of getting in that territory. And we obviously talked about them going to Scott Barnett in that Carleton game and quite early, where it's like, I mean, I don't even know how as a coach you necessarily articulate this to your players, but you kind of are in that stage where you obviously you still want to put your best foot forward every game, get whatever successes you can, but you're kind of thinking about 2024 now in a way. I think you'd have to be, but yeah, I don't know. We're both on Mac on this one on the road. It'll be interesting to see, how they attack given the advantages that they should have. I mean, maybe as you said, whether it's figuring out in the run game what types of looks, man, zone, gap, whatever kind of work best for them, speed options to the outside. But like I said, knowing that they certainly will be passing a lot, because that is clearly how they've kind of established thus far their offense. And maybe we'll see James Priestner back. Like, once again, that was one of those names that we brought up in terms of big injuries from the year or just missing pieces, and see how that looks. I want to see a full 4 quarters of Keegan Hall dominating, because I want to see a full 4 quarters of Keegan Hall dominating. I'm saying that selfishly, and I think it'll be good for him too. I think getting the mojo going. We obviously talk about how great it is to watch games at Varsity Stadium. It's a great place to play a game too. Like I got one of my first dresses was at U of T. I'm a Toronto guy. Seeing the CN Tower there kind of in the background, knowing that like my mom lives like 15 minutes west, like that was so cool for me for that, especially. I'd have to imagine no matter where you're from in the province, playing there though is really cool. So I think that'll be a good moment for him. Full 4 quarters of what should be domination. Tom, any last thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I really hope to see some positivity from this McMaster team. I want to see some signs of life on that offense, and just showcasing that, you know what, we're not giving up on this season. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to try some other things out and see if we can salvage getting into the playoffs where all bets are off. So, Mac, come at this. Whatever you have to do. Once again, outside looking in on this, wake up, find that competitive fire again, and get back to where we think you should be in this year.
Yeah. And honestly, I might just have to sit down and maybe I'll kind of challenge you to, well, not challenge, but kind of propose that we both do this as an exercise, maybe coming off this weekend, of looking at what is realistically the lowest record a team might be able to get to sneak into the playoffs at this point. Because it's like, could they at least, because we have that added playoff team now, right? Like, could they at least be in a conversation for like a tiebreak situation at 3-5? The 4-4 feels like a bit of a stretch, but who knows? Maybe they just go on a heater. Maybe it starts with this game on the road. But we'll see. The last thing I do want to say, because I feel like I was remiss for not mentioning this on, well, either of the other 2 pods we did earlier this week. We talked about Michael Horvat kind of being this MVP for at least Mac's offense. Just in the world of kicking, in the world of Canadian football, and just like really awesome stories, of course, this week out in Can West. Got to give a shout out to Maya Turner.
Let's go.
The pride of Minnesota. I forget where exactly she hails from, but of course being the first female football player to I guess it was score in a regular season football game for the Bisons, which of course went for her going, well, I don't know if it was 2 for 2, but getting 2 field goals on the day, including a game winner in overtime. So shout out to Maya, shout out to the Bisons, shout out to Coach Doby. Just a great story. Probably should have been in one of the 2 earlier podcasts, but got the shout out there nonetheless. Great story there. Tom, shall we?
Yeah, let's shout. Hell of a shout out, my friend.
Well, let's move from the U of T MAC game to Guelph at Waterloo. Now, this was a game that, coming off of that 2-week stretch in the late first half of the regular season, I was ringing the bell being like, you know what? As of coming off, I think it was off of week 3, I'm like, hey, you know what? Frankly, I think I'm going Waterloo at home, all things being as they are right now. And we certainly have a changing of at least for me, my emotions on this one for Guelph. They're coming off of that just remarkable drubbing of the York Lions last week, that impressive nail-biting win against Mac, where they showed so much moxie in that one. For Waterloo, they're coming off of their bye week, where they were coming then off of Battle of Waterloo, that game at home against Windsor, which despite the 37-0 outcome, we did feel like there were some positives, frankly, on both sides of the ball for them. But here's where this gets interesting, and I'll pass it to you like this one, and we looked at this probably 2 weeks ago, or perhaps coming off of the MAC game when you highlighted how Guelph changed their defense schematically, and thinking that, okay, when they go into York, they can play a 3-4, they can play a no 4, they can play whatever, and they'll win that game. They stuck with that front. But the question being now is that as they kind of get into the latter part of their stretch, that is the Guelph Griffins, the latter stretch of their season, I should say, and they get this game, they get their bye week, then they have Queens and Carleton to end up the season. And they put themselves in a great position right now to, as you've framed it, control their own destiny and really fight for some home playoff games. And it really is, coming off of where we saw them in the first couple of weeks, an impressive feat. And I think what'll be so fascinating is that, like we said, they bring out this front against Mac, and it made sense, even if it wasn't Donovan Carter's doing, of just being like, Mac, we dare you to run the ball on us right now. They could have run, like I said, any kind of defense against York. They would have got a similar outcome. But now they're playing a team that, from what we've seen thus far this year, and going back to like some of those positives that we've liked from Waterloo, a team that can run the ball. Right now, they're sitting, where is it? They're fourth in the OUA in rushing yards per game at 203. So when you look at, we think about sometimes how numbers get skewed in terms of, like Laurier's giving up so many pass yards, but that's because teams are having to pass it against them, right? And so that whole idea that, maybe, go back to last year, Nolan Caban had some incredible passing yard numbers. Well, maybe that's just a function of the fact that they were behind in a lot of games, so they had to pass. I say all that in saying that, this is a team right now that's sitting, at 1-3, but they're still recognizing that, we're a good running team. They got Anthony Miller, they got Quentin Springer, the rookie, of course. We talked about Grigorsic on the offensive side of the ball. If there was a rookie of the year, if you were to give who the rookie of the year is there, it's probably Quentin Springer. So this is going to be a really fascinating test for Guelph. Let's start on that side of the ball, or that kind of matchup there, where we have this Waterloo team that is running with the best of them in the OUA this year, and this new Guelph philosophy on the defensive side with this 3-4, and just what that might mean in this outcome, or if maybe they'll change it up a little bit. What do you think from that standpoint in this matchup?
I think if you're really going to be successful with this kind of a 30 front, and just kind of before I even get into that, knowing Coach Carter and knowing the defense that he's run previously at Toronto and at Windsor before, he's definitely stuck to this 30 front and not tried to, switch things up by going to a 40 front or things, at least for the most part. Now, in order to be successful, really successful with a defense like this, you need defensive linemen that can eat up double teams. And in the positions that they're in, like I said, those defensive ends are either head up or just inside of the offensive tackles. So you're in a good position to, at the very least, eat up the tackle, but more often than not, probably eat up the guard. And you're pretty much dealing with double teams kind of across the line here. The other side of this is that you need linebackers that can take on an offensive lineman. Very much so reminiscent of, like a John Rush that I used to play against, where you would get up to the second level and he's not waiting for you. He pops you in the face and gets some separation, and then is able to shed and go off and make a tackle. That's the kind of players that you need in this kind of a defense in order to be successful. Now, with the guys that we've already seen on the defensive line here for Guelph, I think this is actually a really great recipe for them. With Curtis Woodmansey, Josh Campbell, and Nick Parchenko all across as the 3 down linemen, those dudes are loads to deal with, and they are able to eat up offensive linemen in that running game, certainly. And then when you look in the back end, you've got, if Jacobson is back in this one. That's a huge get. We obviously saw what he did the last game against McMaster. If you get Brandon Farrago back and he's nice and healthy, and a few other guys, like you've got a real opportunity here to, even though you're in a 34 defense, to stack up and get up against the run here. The other side of this to also think about is Waterloo is primarily a power run team. When you're doing power running, and when I say that, I mean you're doing pulls, you're doing powers, counter trays, traps, things of that nature. When you get into something like that, it's very much a man focus. Okay, we're gonna trap this guy here, so by process of elimination, if I'm not pulling for that guy, this is my guy, or whatever the case, and you kind of work it out that way. When you go up against a 3-4 defense, and suddenly you don't have guys who are in the dirt as much, and you have linebackers that are able to move around, those rules can get skewed very quickly, and you need to be able to think on your feet, or just know, okay, the next guy that crosses my face, that's who I got to take here, and just trust that everybody in behind will just kind of follow suit. So it makes it a whole hell of a lot trickier when you get into something like that as well.
On a very personal note on that standpoint, with the team I'm coaching right now, a junior football team here in the city, we very much run gap schemes, and today was the day where we did like a very thorough blitz period in our inside run period. And yeah, having to talk through when you can double, when you can't double, when you call them off, and when the rule of is just, hey, gap away and just please find someone wearing the wrong color. How, obviously with grade 9s and 10s, it can be a handful, but even at the next level, because those athletes just get that much better, it can be tough. We obviously knew this was going to be a point of conversation we would talk about, but of course I'd be remiss to not shout out my guy, our guy, Mike Aloisio, who hit us up kind of with this point in specific to address. And what I find so interesting though is that, because you raise a great point about those big guys they have in the middle to be able to eat up those gaps, hold those double teams, because obviously when you can give your linebackers space to just to flow freely, scrape and fill, that's the ideal. Or, if you're Mac back in the 2010s, you tell your D lineman to grab cloth and just bring him to the ground, you dirty rat bastards, you.
Yeah, we sure did.
Yeah, you did. Cutting, pulling, guard. Oh my God. I can't believe I almost once said on a pod not too long ago that I kind of root for you guys. I hate you, man. Oh my gosh.
Greg, you hate Greg Knox.
That's I do hate Greg Knox. You're absolutely right. Oh my gosh. Look at the vein in my forehead right now. I'm an angry individual. My goodness.
Oh man.
But anyways. Goose fraba, goose fraba.
It's over now. You don't have to deal with that anymore.
Only in my nightmares. But what's so interesting though is that they do run that kind of power scheme, but then with Quentin Springer, he is such a he is greased lightning, man. He is I'm trying to remember what's the great Muhammad Ali line. Like he turns off the lights, full like a butterfly sting like a bee. He turns off the lights and he's in bed before the lights turn off or whatever. Like he is he's quick, he's fast, he's explosive. And so how they can kind of run that power game at you, but whether it's through power or just him kind of, or by a more outside concept, or whether it's just him kind of creating on the fly, how they'll deal with that. For Guelph offensively, we've now seen a couple weeks though where they've really hit their mojo, right? And we're seeing it on all levels. And at the end of the day, we've talked about our guy Tyson Hergott for these Waterloo Warriors on defense, and it'll be just great. It's fun every time there's a team on a bye week, and then you get them back, and it's always like, oh yeah, we get a week of Tyson Hergott, or like whatever it might be, where there's always like some factor, some kind of aspect of these teams that's always so enjoyable when they get back on the field. But as you talked about, this offensive line, they're starting to put it together for Guelph. We're seeing what Donovan Malloy is doing in the run game. We're seeing how effective Tristan Aboud is being, obviously with Sean Janusa seemingly being his number one target, and then a guy, the rookie in Arsenault being another great target for him, and how they're moving it around. Going back to that Windsor game, because obviously like what Laurier did on Battle of Waterloo was just such a remarkable offensive performance by by Elgersma and everything like that. And hey, who knows? After what we saw Guelph do against York, though I obviously put Waterloo much higher than York, maybe they've just gotten to that level. Not that they're putting up 88 points every week, but going back to the Windsor game, right? Because that's where we really saw Danny Skelton have his first outing of being like, or the first outing where they really seemed to be like, yeah, we can probably just work our three-headed monster of running backs. And obviously Joey Zorn busted that big run for them that opened up the scoring, or the first major for Windsor. But where they really said, no, we want to win. We're certain we can win this game on the ground, and we'll win it in the air. We'll win it with a mix of both. But we really do want to have this being like getting the ball rolling and being like, yeah, show the world, show the league, show Danny if for whatever reason he has any lack of belief in himself, that like we can win a game getting you to throw the ball 25 to 30 times, right? So with that in mind, with what Guelph's been showing and just kind of thinking about, they're going into their bye and then they have these two big opponents at the end of their season with Queens and then Carleton. In that component of, because let's be real, from what we're seeing so far at this point in the season, and we have to evaluate what we've seen most recently, Guelph is certainly the favorite in this game, and that's who I'm definitely picking in this one. In the same spirit, we kind of talked a little bit with Mac, but for different reasons in their game. What component of the Guelph offense do you want to see them kind of lean into a little bit more to maybe refine or tinker, as opposed to, and who knows, maybe they will just come out and be like, no, we're just going to play our best, most well-rounded game offensively? Or do you think that they will say, hey, you know what, I do think we want to, like, let's get Ogilvy going a little bit, or actually who's going to be that guy if we need to be spelling Malloy a little bit, or hey, actually we have a new wrinkle we want to try with Marshall McRae in this situation as well, and actually just bringing up his name. How much of a factor does, having Mr. Tyrell Ford coaching with the Waterloo Warriors, helping up their defense, maybe give a little insight if Marshall comes onto the field for them. But more specifically, that first point of just from what we're seeing with Guelph right now, how they are going to have to prepare going into their bye, and then for the home stretch for them with those opponents, of the things you want to see them really work towards offensively.
I still think that with this, I still want them to be focused a little bit on the basics. And now you come out against McMaster and win that game outright. Tristan Aboud does his thing, and then obviously the defense really shows up for them as well. You go up against a team like York and you go off and don't punt at all in that game. So your offense is obviously firing on all cylinders. But with that, I still want to make sure that you can rely on your go-to, or have that like kind of fail safe to go back to when you get into these teams, whether that's in later on this season, or if for whatever reason you don't see some real stiff competition until you get into the playoffs. You really want to make sure that you can do the things right. And I think a big part of that is, yes, the offensive lineman's going back to the run, but Donovan Malloy certainly making sure that he can still be effective in this run game, but also Marshall McRae. He's very much showcased to be an incredible athlete, making people miss and going out and kind of doing his thing in every game here. He's top 5 in the OUA for rushing touchdowns just because of that. So I think making sure that he can get a little bit more involved in the offense when you need that kind of wildcat style in order to get into getting some more running yards and taking a little bit of pressure off of Tristan Aboud, I think is going to be really important here. When you have a guy like Tyson Hergott, it's not, obviously there's a lot of things that you can do for defensive ends. You can double team them. You can do whatever else. But what we've kind of seen so far for Tyson, it's not necessarily if he will make a play, but where. And so how do you keep him honest? Because this offensive line for Guelph, certainly in the beginning of parts of the season, had a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of things kind of going on with them. I don't think we saw necessarily their best play. In the past 2 games, obviously, drastic difference. But you're going up against probably the best pass rusher that you've seen since Kole Amusin that you played against in in Windsor, and once again in that Windsor game, you let up 4 sacks. So I would say, how do you get better in terms of your offensive line play and then that running attack? Because that's really where I want to see some consistency here. As we kind of went through it in our midseason review, Tristan Aboud has actually been a really solid play at quarterback throughout this entire season. I had him above Danny Skelton in my own top 5 because of the play that we've seen and the decision making more than anything. Only 1 interception despite big blowout losses against Windsor and against Laurier, where there's a lot of times in some certain situations, you're just kind of throwing up prayers and trying to go downfield to create something. Only 1 pick. So I really like what I've seen so far from Tristan Aboud. I'm hoping that Janusis for them is, we saw him on the sidelines after he took something of a hit last game. So he might be out this game. I'm hoping that he's okay. He's healthy. He can come back. If not, you deal with this, and then you go into the bye weeks. We'll have a couple of weeks in order to get rested. But I love what I've seen from Kane Stevenson and the rest of those receivers. So offensive line play and running game, that's really where my focus is going to be for this one for Guelph.
Yeah. Oh gosh, great point. Yeah, I forgot about that piece. Yeah, for Janusis. So I think I'm in agreement with your assessment of it, even prior to you bringing that up. But this is where it gets a little tricky. I do think, once again, from where we are right now, Guelph is certainly like a good gap ahead of Waterloo. And hey, who knows how Waterloo dealt with their bye week? Like, maybe they're going to come out firing on all cylinders. I'm sure they will be. Coach Burt, love him to death. How we galvanized the troops. It's a pretty young team. Whatever. Some great coaching staff. All these things. And I wonder then, if you're Guelph, not knowing the full status of Janusis, like, do you just play it entirely safe and say, no, we got the bye week next week? I guess there's a couple ways you can look at it. You can say, hey, we're going to, even if he's not 100%, we're going to dress you. We'll use you only as much as we need to, because we know we still got the bye week next week. Or do you say, we do think that we can win this on the ground and having some of our other receivers step up, the Marshall McCray factor, all these other things, and we're giving you 2 full weeks to rest up. Obviously, neither of us know the outcome of it. I'm very curious how they play it, and I wonder whether at all, if in the early stages of the game, whether maybe we do see this as a tighter game than perhaps some teams are going to suspect. And then maybe Guelph pulls away in the standpoint of if because and obviously a lot of the rushing stats against Guelph as far as their defense, it's still biased because of that immense outing that Windsor put up on them. But hey, if you're only going by the numbers, they give up the 3rd most in rushing yards per game. Wait, why am I talking about their rushing yards? We're talking about I have that flipped around. Well, except maybe going back to Quentin Springer and all that. Scrap that. That was just a weird brain fart by me. But hey, but for what it's worth, Waterloo sitting, ranked ahead of them in the rushing ranks and everything like that. And it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, that's a great point. Not making me move off of my Guelph pick in this one, though, but just to what they do with Janusis with this one, whether they treat it as a 2-week bye for him, or if they say, we'll have you dressed, and if it has to be tight for a little bit, we'll use you sparingly, break glass in case of emergency. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't think I have. I'm trying to remember now. Gosh, now I'm worried if we're forgetting anything else with that piece. But I don't know. Any last thoughts on sort of what you're looking forward to and looking to see come to fruition in this one, Tom?
Yeah, it is interesting, because I think if this exact same thing happens in terms of Janusis with a potential injury here, if they lose the game at Mac and Janusis is kind of on the fence, I think they play him in this one just to try to make sure that they're using anything that they can, and trying to save a season, whatever, because of the position that they are in, and because of how much at least we think that they are better, because spoiler alert, I am going with the Griffins as well here. I think regardless of if he's on the fence or not, you rest him. You rest him this week, you rest him next week, you give him 2 full weeks, and making sure that he is as healthy and ready to go, because the following week after that, you're playing against Queens. And despite the fact that what their record shows, their offense might have some issues, that defense is damn good. So I'm I'm interested to see what they do there. But the other side as well, because of this game against York, we saw a lot of the receiving options that Guelph has. And a guy that I haven't even mentioned yet, but Willem Arsenault, he has been playing fantastic for them and is another rookie phenom who could potentially go up against Quentin Springer for in terms of,
Great
the
call.
offensive side of the rookie of the year section. But Jacob Thomas, Kane Stevenson, even Craig Sherrington, one catch in there for 17 yards, but there's a bunch of folks that are in there as well. So I don't think that they're obviously Janusis is a former All-Canadian, like he's the real deal here, but they can get through this game without him, and getting some valuable reps to other guys who might be stepping up is obviously great. But once again, Guelph comes away with this one. Really want to see how that offensive line and that running game goes out against Waterloo.
And you mentioned that home stretch, and like it really is just such a great opportunity for that offensive line to really show their mettle, where it's like specifically just from a pass protection standpoint, you're dealing with Hergott, then you're dealing with Van Wishart, and then you're dealing with Onyeka to wrap up your season. You have three of the best pass rushers in the OUA. And as you mentioned, Kaladi had a field day against them earlier this year. We'll see. Once again, this is a really interesting stretch for Guelph because in some ways it helps them kind of ramp up off the bye with some really strong opponents who they should be able to be in good matchups for. Depending on how some things break, it could be one of those situations where it's like, that's not what we like, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're both on Guelph with that one. Let's head back to Toronto to where the Queen's Golden Gales will be rolling into York Lions Stadium to take on the York Fighting Lions. I mean, I guess number one thing, much like how my eyes in the Guelph York game last week first went to, all right, when Guelph trots out on defense, how many guys are walking out on the defensive line? The number one question that has to be on everyone's mind is, are we seeing Alex Freakin? Because once again, it's a break in his non-throwing arm, correct?
Correct. That's the report.
And here's what I'm thinking on that one. Because we kind of talked about how much does he need his non-throwing arm? I guess it depends on perhaps how big a cast is it, if it is casted up, or could he still manage it with a cast? And even if he isn't a cast, then maybe how long is he in that thing? Whatever. But to me, it's one of those things where it's like, if we don't see him trot out on the field, then he's certainly done for the regular season. Because it's not as if he's dealing with a sprained shoulder and maybe it's we're still resting. If he's in a cast and he can't play, then it's not like anything's going to change until he's out of that cast. And if he just broke this 2 weeks ago, then once again, it's going to be at least a month. So maybe he's back the last week of the regular season, in the best case scenario. So that's really, to me, the major question for them. This isn't like we said with Janusis, where it's his arm was in a bit of a sling. Maybe it's a little AC sprain or something. Not that that's nothing to sneeze at. But it's if his arm is broken and he can't go, he couldn't go last week, then if he's still out, then it's then he's out. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it until that thing is healed up and he's in at least some kind of a soft cast or something like that. I can't, there's really nothing else that I am more curious about, because as we talked about, he was obviously right there when we looked at, Miracle or Vreekin as far as which team is capped the most by the loss of their pivot. And I mean, I still think that we made the right decision in saying it was Miracle, but it wasn't by a large margin, because obviously, I mean, who knows? Russell Weir, obviously we see him getting a bit of time, and we use that argument of, when you go back to Ottawa, okay, you lose Miracle so early, you get LeCandro pretty much for that week 1 game. You go to U of T, not as strong an opponent. Yeah, they didn't have an offensive outing that they would have really liked, but you know what? Still getting used to it. Then they get their bye week. All right, so you get Russell Weir in there against Windsor. The offense can't really do much at all in the passing game. Now you get this game against York where if it is Weir, we've obviously seen when it was Vreekin going back 2 weeks ago, them letting him throw 42 times in the game. I kind of think you need to give Weir those kind of numbers in his attempts to get that mojo going, because once again, if it is Weir, then that means it is Weir. Tom, go.
Certainly. No, that's a hell of a call out. 100%. This is not something that it's like, oh, it's a worse sprain than we thought, so he's going to be out. If he's out, he's out. That's
arm's
100%. But yeah, I think that talk about a drastic change if this is Russell Weir going from the best defense in the OUA to the worst. But yeah, I'm thinking that this is kind of the best case scenario for something along those lines, where if Vrikin is out, then Russell Weir gets every snap and you can really start to showcase a little bit more of what he's trying to do here. Hopefully get Jared Kasari and Anthony Souls back a little bit going here as well. Obviously going up against Windsor, like I said, it's not just our opinion. They are actually the best defense in the OUA right now. So getting them a little bit more on the ball here, getting them some more running yards and taking the pressure off of Russell Weir, I think is definitely going to be where Queens is trying to get to. And quite honestly, even if Alex Vrikin does come back, I still think that that's going to be the game plan here, to lean more on that run game, to get back to where you were last year and the year before, albeit with both of these guys and Yan Longa, who was also another phenomenal running back. So I'm interested to see how this run game gets back onto things, because while the other two teams that we've talked about in MAC and in Guelph, it's kind of those, yeah, it'd be nice to see the run game a little bit more here, change things up a little bit, get a little bit more established. I think with this team, that you need it. It needs to be the focal point of your offense right now, because Russell Weir, as far as good as he could be, and I don't want to take anything away from him, this is game 2 that he's going to be playing in. And by the way, the first game that he was in, he threw 3 picks and got sacked 8 times. So yeah, not a great first outing for him in his first OUA game.
Yeah, no, definitely not. But you know what? I kind of, I don't want to say I disagree, because I feel like we never really disagree, Tom. But I'm gonna paint a different picture, because you said even if it is Vrikin, still try and get your run game going. Once again, they can bring out the old timers and they'll win this game. Like, it doesn't matter. You're gonna win this game, because even if it is Vrikin in there, like, and let me pump the brakes a little bit, because I'm getting into a territory where I feel like I might be coming across being mean towards him. I'm not, but we're just looking at the numbers. In the 3 games he's played in, he's at 60% completion percentage, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Well, I don't really understand the OUA efficiency numbers, but so it's like, so I think if it's Weir, let him throw the rock a ton to get some kind of a mojo going, because like, we still love that offensive line they have with those, those big boys up front. Yeah, maybe you get the run game going by just like getting that, getting some mojo going. But once again, it goes back to this question of like, what really comes from, beating up on York in that facet. It's kind of like playing sports against your younger brother, where it's like, yeah, you're supposed, if you beat up on him, it's like, oh, you beat up on your younger brother. But if it's a tight game against your younger brother, it's like, oh, your younger brother kept it a little tight there, Mm-hmm. So to me, whichever quarterback is in this game for them, I think what they have to lean into, Weir or Vrikin, whether he's in a cast or RoboCop arm or whatever's going on for him, because I think that run game will be there for them, even if it hasn't been as explosive as we saw last year. But we really need a bit more from whoever's at quarterback for them.
Most definitely. And I should clarify, the comments that I made were as for Queens as a whole going into the rest of this season, where they need to lean a little bit more on the run game. This is once again another one of like, you could just do triple or quadruple reverses all game, and you could still probably put up 70 points here. York really seems to be struggling at the very least. So yeah, I think that is very important to call out though, and I completely agree with you here that yeah, regardless even if Alex Vrikin is back and turns out, what we had heard is completely wrong and it was just a sprain and he's back and he's better than ever, blah, blah, blah. He is so far nowhere close to where we saw him last year. So get him some confidence here, have him just rip it this game. And even if it's not him, if it's Russell Weir, like you said, do the same thing.
Yeah.
Have him just rip this ball all over the field, get him 500 yards in the air it out to as many receivers as possible to try to gain some more chemistry, especially if it's Weir, and just come away with a convincing win here to get into the rest of the season.
Yeah. I mean, because their defense is going to shut them down. They're spectacular. I'm sure their special teams units. I mean, I don't know what is. I think it's still Tyler Mullen. I think kicking at Queens. I believe that's their dude, right? He's a consistent guy for them. It really is that offensive side of the ball for them that we want to see. And once again, not like you did at U of T. Like, don't take a half to get going. Like that was that.
I know, obviously, like we've talked about this in spurts or whatever, and I'm sorry to cut you off.
No.
This Queens team is 1-3, and the one win that they had to come on in the second half against a Toronto team that scored 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns all year, something like that. Like, this is, talk about a drop off in terms of what we saw from last year. So yeah, put up 80 points against York, for God's sakes.
No, do it. And in the process, hey, Van Wisher, we're talking a lot about Kaladia Moosen. We're talking about Luke Brubaker. We're talking about Tyson Hergott. We're talking about our guy Mufta, a.k.a. Move the heck out of my way. I'm going to go sack your quarterback. Hey, we know who Van is, but, have that game the same way that you pointed out. Hey, when Kaladi gets to go up against York in week 9 to cap their season off, maybe there are records to be broken. Speaking of records broken, I'm pretty much spent on this one, to be honest. I don't know what else to say. We might have broken a record for as quickly as you and I can talk about any component of an OUA football game, because it's obviously Queens in this one. I want to see who's at quarterback for them, and whichever quarterback it is, I want to see them airing the ball out. And it's so weird. Like, this Queens season makes no flipping sense to me whatsoever. And we can talk about how they could so easily have won that Laurier game. They could have so easily won that Western game. If Vreeken's in the game for them against Windsor, pretty certain at the very least he's not throwing 2 pick sixes, and who knows what happens there. Because you add in, the guys like Nico Cuomo, Aiden O'Neill, Nathan Falcone, as far as these threats they have at receiver on top of the running backs. It makes no sense to me why this team is where they are right now. You said 1-3, and your schedule, and once again, you've been a top dog for 2 years in a row now. This is what you get. You get a harder schedule. So now, you get your wins against your Yorks and your U of T's, and you're in some close games against some of these other teams. But you're supposed to be the standard here. You're supposed, and in some ways it's great, because it just means that it just speaks to that ascension that we've seen this year of the Lauriers, the Windsors, the Guelphs, the Carltons of the world. So, but what is going on in Queens this year, at Kingston this year? Because it's getting close to hitting that panic button. I think, you're hitting that panic button already.
I'm smashing that panic button. The glass has been broken. I'm punching that panic button right down. Like, Queens, we got to see something here. And one thing actually that I'm just kind of like, I think we've talked about it a little bit, but haven't actually said it yet. And you correct me if I'm wrong here. Have we seen Silas Hubert all year?
Oh, Schnickerdoodles. I don't think we have.
We have not. He has not played this entire year. The former lineman of the year has not played for Queens this entire year.
What the heck is going on? But Tom, at the same time, that's not their flipping problem.
No,
that's not.
You've got Van Wisher.
They got Van Wisher. They got all these great linebackers. Their secondary, Miller Melanson. They got Stefan East. They got the old man Kelowna back there, right? They got all these guys. Liam Sutherland at their linebacking core. That's not the fact that their defense could be that much more dominant. Great. More power to you. Love that for you. But that's not line play on either side of the ball isn't the problem. And what blows my mind is that like my whole life as a football person, and certainly my whole life as a football coach, just preach, well, if you can dominate the trenches, which they usually are going to do, they're top 3, top 4 team as far as their offensive defensive line play, then you should just win games by virtue of that. You add in the skill position guys, you add in the guys that they have in the back end of their defense, and like, it makes no sense. Even if you want to say, well, that incredible play at the end of the Western game, and hey, if they had beat Western, that would have been a phenomenal thing for them to have pulled off, right? The Laurier game, we knew Laurier was so much better this year. All these types of things for them. But it's just like, man, Queens, just like everyone else in the OUA got better this year, and somehow it just feels like Queens did not.
Yeah, like Queens is now in the same conversation with something like that as Toronto. Like, what? Queens, what?
Nate Hobbs, this is all your fault.
He gets off the mic and suddenly Queens just suffers. Nate, I'm putting this all on you, buddy.
No, this literally, he was part of our team. He's still part of our team for 2 years. And in those 2 years, Queens goes on Yates Cup runs. He leaves our program and everything falls to part. Nate Hobbs, this one is on you, my friend. Anyways, shall we move on, I guess?
Yeah, let's move on. We've talked way too much about this game. Especially with the 2 we've got coming up next. Okay, so the final of our Saturday matchups. I mean, Tom, before we even get into this one, hey, it's a beautiful thing that, I'm skipping ahead because we have one more game before we get to Panda, but the Panda's kind of on its own pedestal on Sunday, on the 1st of October. Happy early anniversary, Tom. Thank you.
And so we only have 4 games on the Saturday, but they're still all at 1 o'clock. Like, what on earth is that about? But of course, the last of our Saturday games that Tom is alluding to, where we're getting to the heavy hitters, we're getting to the big guns of the weekend. We're getting into the Western Mustangs traveling west on the 401 to Wind City to take on the Lancers. We have 2 5-0 teams duking it out. This is so spectacular. We have 2 of the best defenses in the OUA, 2 of the best rushing attacks. We have our pick for midseason MVP of the year in Evan Hillock. We have a top 5, top 4, in my case, quarterback in Danny Skelton, with a plethora of receivers to throw it to, with the best just diversity of running backs who can all kind of kill you in their own unique way. Now, of course, Joey Zorn missed that game against Queens. And as you said, maybe that was just a bit of like, well, the week-to-week aspect, maybe just a bit of dirty pool. No, not dirty pool. Nothing wrong with framing like that, but a little trickery on the part of the Don Coach Cercelli and not wanting to give anything away. There's so much, like, I am so excited for this game. And I actually the first question I want to ask you, Tom, because I do feel like this could be, well, not could be, I shouldn't say it was so timorously. I feel like this is going to be a very tight game. I feel like it's going to be uber competitive, uber physical. And with that in mind, I want to ask you, to whom does this game mean more to between these 2 clubs? Because you could envision a situation where, on the one hand, the idea of Western losing a regular season football game is such a foreign concept to, well, most people on earth that it just seems weird that, not that they would wave the white flag at any point, but if it's getting into that stage where maybe, how do I want to say this? Where if you're having to say, all right, you know what? It's coming down to it. We're going to plan X. We're going to plan X? It's only week 6, coach. Why are we? No, because we're winning this game and we're going to take out these guys and show them who's for real. And in this case, is it going to be, going back to maybe a little family type of analogy, is it going to be Big Brother, aka the Western Mustangs, saying to the Windsor Lancers, all right, you know what? We've been letting you play around with us for a bit too long. we're going to bring out whatever that play or scenario is, and just, we are shutting the door on you. We are putting this to bed. Don't you dare like think, dream, even whatever, that you can compete with us, and or even worse, that you can beat us. And they go to that thing. Or is it little brother saying to big brother, no, 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 we are taking this chance to knock you guys out. I don't care that it's week 6 or whatever, because of course the reverse of that is to say that, like, which of these teams, because you don't want to necessarily play your hands, because this could be a rematch we see in the playoffs, possibly even in the Yates Cup. That's the first thing I want to start with you, Tom. Who does this game matter more to?
When you look at these programs and you look at the mentalities, even that what we've seen on the field, it's hands down Windsor. For sure it is. Every single person, I think, on that squad has been saying to themselves since week 1, we are legit. This is our year. We can do this. We are the team to beat in the OUA. And especially playing at home, where they have under the golden arches with the dawn, that Windsor Lancer magic. I really, really think that this means more to Windsor than it does to Western. Now, what I will say is that maybe this game, in terms of who they are playing, the fact that Windsor is playing against Western, that's what they really care about. That's what they're going all over for, and that's what they're getting jacked up for. What Western cares about, and what every other team should care about, is, once again, these are 2 undefeated teams with a very strong possibility that the only team that's undefeated going into the last part of the last game this year is going to get the bye going into the playoffs. Why is that important? Because for the last 20 plus years, only teams who have had a bye week going into the playoffs have won the Yates Cup. Previously, if you were 1 or 2, you would have a bye, and then there was some dichotomy there. But in the past couple of years, at least in the past 2, they've added in that 7th team, so it's just 1. And it's been Western, and they've won it each time. Having that bye is so important for a number of reasons, in order to just rest up properly and make sure that you're ready to go for the rest of the playoffs, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that is a huge point of contention, especially with these Mustangs kind of looking over their shoulders, and not even looking over their shoulders, looking left to right and seeing a Windsor squad that they're about to play against at 5-0, and then looking over to your left and seeing that terrifying monster that is the Laurier Golden Hawks at 5-0 going into a bye week and getting better and better every year. You need to be undefeated if you're going to get that with these 2 teams on your tail, and that's what matters most to these Mustangs.
Yeah, I certainly agree that I do think that yeah, for Windsor, that the idea of being able to really like prove any doubters that might still be out there for you wrong is huge. And wow, like when we go back to the matchup last year with these 2 teams, once again, don't be fooled by final scores, people. 50-18 does not tell you the story of that matchup that, oh yeah, took place in London. This game was 25-18 going into the 4th quarter. Now, albeit giving up 25 points in a quarter, not great. But you certainly put yourself in a position to win when you can go into the final, quarter in that type of a situation. And this is certainly a Windsor team that is leaps and bounds better than they were last year. And yeah, the idea of Western being like, I got Windsor on my left, Laurier on my right, Guelph in the review mirror, who we won't even see till a playoff game. Wow, like they're no doubt they're keeping their cool. They still got their Western swagger, no doubt. But here's my next question for you, Tom, because we talk so much about the line play. And well, do I want to go there? We should talk about Joey Zorn. That's question about it all. No, I'm sticking with where I want to go here. We have talked about obviously in every game at some point line play comes up, and we talked about this defense for Windsor, top of the OUA, and Yes, Western's right there, especially that run defense for them. Even though we did see Amilcar Polk still kind of stuck it to them. Even when you remove that one big run for Polk of 59 yards or whatever it was, he was at least still near 100 yards, even taking that one away. He ended up like 140 or something. Yes, we're so excited to watch Kaladi versus Anderson when it comes to DN versus left tackle. And part of me feels like, hey, you know what? As much as I'm sure if you're Windsor, you want to say, no, let's put our best on their best and show them what's up. You also could just say, put them on the other guy, because you can do that. But when we look at the interior of the line, because I'll be frank, I think they're going to have, well, not think, they're going to have their hands full with Mufta. And honestly, we're spoiled just watching incredible offensive line play from Western year in, year out at every single position, tackle, guard, and at center. We've seen a few games, I mean, going back to that Carleton game, really what comes to mind for me, where seeing some pressure being given up right in the middle, and I don't think they've played a defensive tackle like they're getting with Big 99. So they're going to have their hands full with Kaladi, especially, like I said, if Windsor just has the sort of takes a bit more of a humble approach and saying, okay, then we'll just put him on your lesser offensive tackle. But then you still have this guy in the middle. So you're having to double team someone. And you know what? Maybe even with that, they can still obviously move the ball. I don't doubt that. But this is a challenge I don't think the Western Mustangs have seen since maybe the national semifinals last year against Laval, where they've faced a defense up front that is going to be this formidable. What do you think about the matchup in the trenches, specifically from that perspective?
Yeah, 100%. You look at this Windsor defense and everything that they've been able to do here. This is the best defense in the OUA for a reason. Their play on that defensive line has been outstanding. Kaladi Amusan it was our pick for lineman of the year this year, but Mufta, he is playing some of his best football as it continues on in the season here. And especially as a lineman, as a defensive lineman who every single play you are getting hit by an offensive lineman. And when you're a defensive tackle, not only are you seeing, you're getting hit every play like a defensive end would, but now you're having to deal with double teams and potential trap plays where you're getting hit like ear hold when you're not seeing it coming here. So the fact that he's been taking so much abuse and seemingly getting better and better each week is absolutely miraculous to see from something like this. And I think that this Windsor defensive line is going to give this Western O-line fits. I don't think that Keon Edwards, I think this is my hot take for this game. This is Keon's second game this year where he doesn't go over 100 yards.
Wow.
Like, I really think that this Windsor defensive line steps up and wreaks some havoc in the backfield here. And this comes back to, Evan, can you get the job done here? And one of the things that I wanted to bring up, especially about that game last year, you mentioned it, 25-18 going into the fourth quarter. That was still in a game where Danny Skelton and Josh Sims were going back and forth a little bit.
Great call.
Josh Sims went 2 for 4, 12 yards and a pick. And Danny Skelton even 10 for 17, 119 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. So you didn't even see a fraction of the quarterback play that we are now seeing from Danny Skelton. Hopefully Joey Zorn is back for this Windsor team because that's a massive part of it. But even if he's not, Christopher John is playing great, and so is Mumbo. Maybe Mumbo has been playing phenomenal for these guys as well. So it's still something of a two-headed monster, even if you don't have Joey Zorn, albeit, in my opinion, Zorn being the best out of the three. Still, this is a even better Windsor team going up against a Western team that, while still being at the very top of the OUA, is not as solid in some key positions as they were last year.
Oh, gosh, this game's going to be so good. Well, so let's talk about the Zorn piece there. Because despite what Polk did, Western's still averaging, they're only giving up on average 93 yards on the ground. the flip side of that coin, as we've talked about, Windsor, well, they're actually now second to guess who? Western, in terms of what they produce rushing on the ground. This does really, though, feel like, as you mentioned, well, actually, I was going to bring up Evan Hillock at that point, but let's stay on Danny Skelton there, because if Western is able to slow down that run game, we obviously saw the first hiccup in Skelton's season against Queens last week, despite the nice outcome for them. Of course, don't forget, 14 of those points for Windsor came through their defense in that case, right? And it's obviously not getting any easier for Skelton, especially if Zorn's down. And you look at Western as far as the passing yards they give up. Yeah, they're towards the bottom. That, I feel, is more the product of, well, teams are going to pass on them by virtue of them being ahead. Also, you look at the fact that they played Mac, and Mac loves to throw it as much as they possibly can. The Queens game, however many attempts it was, 42 or something, that Freakin had. And quickly, while we're on that, I've realized, listening back to our pod and talking about injuries, really the name that we completely forgot about, and this really goes back to last year as well, is still the fact that Kojo Odum could be at corner for Western. My dude, Kojo, 100%. And frankly, once again, I still think that he can limit Kevin Mittal in that national semifinal, and then who knows what happens in that one. But ifs and buts, whatever, blah, 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 blah. This does kind of feel like we're getting a matchup ultimately between Skelton and Hillock. How do you feel specifically? Let's start with Skelton, where he has this little blip on his radar last week against Queens, and Queens is phenomenal on defense. We just talked about that. But so is Western. He had a good out against Ottawa, but that was an Ottawa defense where so many of those key guys for them in the secondary were frankly dropping like flies in the sort of early to midpoint of that game. Danny Skelton at home versus the Ponies. Yes, he had some action against them last year, but with what we saw last week, better game, bounce back. Where are you kind of projecting his production this coming week?
I am very interested to see how he responds in this one, because I am going to go, we see a better game from Danny Skelton in this one. I really think that. He is also going up against the number 2 defense in terms of takeaways, and especially with 8 interceptions in 5 games so far. The only team that they are second behind is Windsor in that regard. So sure, in practices, when you're doing 1-on-1s or 12-on-12s against the ones, you're going up against the best defense in the OUA, at least so far. This team is very good at taking the ball away, and tied for Windsor in terms of touchdowns off of those takeaways. So you need to have your best game making decisions with the football against Western, because regardless, even not if, when that Windsor defensive line gets through or creates some pressure, Evan Hillock is still the best quarterback in the OUA. He is playing lights out, and quietly, if you want to say that, at least throwing 2 to 3 touchdowns per game. And then, oh, by the way, Keon Edwards is also the reigning OUA MVP, and he's gonna, well, typically anyways, goes for 120, 130 with a touchdown or 2 himself. So the way that I would look at this going forward is your defense is going to do some great things, because they are a great defense, regardless of who they played. I really think that they felt that. If I'm the offensive coordinator for these Windsor Lancers, I'm telling my offense the bare minimum, we have to score 28 points. We have to assume that Western is going to score 4 times. And maybe their defense comes up big and they limit them for sure, but Western is going to score. And I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility to say that they score once per quarter. Score 28 points, and at very least rely on your defense to make some big plays, certainly. But Western is going to do some great things here. And there's a very strong possibility that they do come up with a takeaway, whether that's an interception or a fumble. There's going to be things that Western does in this game that like they'll win in certain scenarios, whether that's individual plays on drives, whatever the case. How do you respond, Windsor? You've showcased that you are an emotional team. You get up the highest of highs for sure, but you've had some problems with penalties. When that Western Mustang smugness comes up against you, and I know you and I have both played against it, even winning against those guys, they still have this air about them that they're better than you, and they will win at any given point, and they believe it. How do you respond? Do you grit your teeth and say, you know what, I'm going to get you this next play and we're going to score? Or do you try to throw a haymaker? Do you try to say something that costs you your team? There's a lot of variables here that goes back to what you and I both said on the mid-review pod when we were talking about the Western effect going into the playoffs. They've been here before. They've been in big games before against great teams, and they've come out on top before. Level-headed and with a solid game plan. Windsor, how do you respond?
Oh my gosh, just so many great things there. I mean, for one, we might have to call on the creative skills of one Dakota Vine to do a mashup from the movie Dodgeball of Globo Gym with their mantra, "We're better than you, and we know it," and just paste Greg Marshall onto Ben Stiller, Stiller's face. I forget what the character's name was.
White Goodman.
White Goodman. Oh. We were talking about linebackers from days of yore as well, and you were mentioning John Rush. My mind, as far as guys who want to hit you in the mouth, right away went to Jean-Gabriel Poulin.
Jean-Gab!
But, oh my gosh. We look at these two teams where Western's giving up 17 points a game. Windsor's giving up 14. Western's scoring 46. Windsor's scoring 34. Now, if you just strictly play it by that, the advantage still obviously falls to Western in that standpoint. But you talk about the emotionality or how Windsor, with the penalties, and specifically how some of those penalties going back to the Waterloo game, that game was so chippy, and part of me almost wonders if maybe that's going to be part of Windsor's game plan in this, where it's like, you know what, actually, like every single play, step on someone's foot. Every single play, step on someone's foot, just like, if you can, put a finger in someone's like ear hole, like of their helmet, like whatever kind of dumb stuff like that. But we did see our OUA MVP pick in Evan Hillock get a little emotional in their game. I think that was the one last week, I believe.
It was.
In a moment of, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a miscommunication where
they had to call a timeout because there was up backs, one on each side, that were kind of going back and forth. They weren't sure who should be on the line of scrimmage here. And despite Evan, I'm sure, calling out the offense because he knows the offense, they still weren't on the same page and they had to burn a timeout. And you saw a little bit of frustration there from Mr. Hillock.
Yeah, and he's a fiery guy. He's a competitor. Like, it's what we expect from the best of our athletes. But it'll be interesting because, I think we see that more out of Windsor. I think we more categorize them of being a bit of that team, and I kind of like that for them. Even though once again, still one of those things that like I kind of like it for them. I don't love it as a general philosophy of being like kind of a little chippy, a little like loose around the edges or whatever. But defensively, obviously, we know how formidable they are up front with what Western can do in the passing. Because as you said, maybe this is a game where Keon gets held under 100, right? I mean, and they still have Yazbek. So as far as the collective rushing, like they'll still get their numbers, right? As good as that defense is for Windsor. And same with Windsor, right? With or without Joey Zorn, especially with him. Like, whether one of those guys goes over 100, which I wouldn't be surprised if they don't, because this Western team is incredible. And obviously they spread out those carries by their backs. The rushing game will kind of be what it is. But this is the thing where, we've seen some great outings from, guys like Devin Verisic, Brenton McDougall, Maceo Christmas, like some of these guys in the back end for Windsor. But as we've talked about, Ethan John, that performance as a linebacker that he had last week against Queens. But as we've been talking about all year, and what played into us both picking Evan at this midseason point, is the fact that Western's philosophy this year, which is vastly different from what it was last year, even with so many of the same faces in that program, is saying that like it starts for us with the passing attack. And though I think Keon's going to get his numbers and Yazbek as well, that's really where I think they're going to continue their offensive philosophy, and whether Windsor can hold up. And that's where it comes down to with you. I mean, it does have that feeling like where, yeah, you need to get, like up to that maybe 28-point mark to even hang on with them, because Evan's going to be slinging it out there. And I really like some of these guys that we're seeing, but they certainly have not, especially with what Queens was showing last week without having Vreekin out there. And then with Ottawa being down with their QB and everything like that, they have not seen a passing attack like they will see tomorrow. And yeah, Kaladi will get after them, but even if, Western, they still obviously do that, a lot of that play action look on some of the deep shots they take. But even if they decide to say, hey, let's keep an extra guy in, I forget who their H-back is this year, but keep him in, do their play action, have the running back kind of stay in the mix, even if they're limiting their skill position. It's like, all right, man, like try to keep up with Savon, try to hold back Seth Robinson, Most and Jamal, sorry. Like it's just the top talent for those guys is so incredible that and the Joey Zorn piece are the two things where I'm just like, man, like I do in so many ways want to pick Windsor. I'm kind of going back and forth on this one too. How do you see Windsor trying to slow that down? Is it just a function of being like, well, he can't throw it 40 yards if he's on his back? Is that really just what it's going to come down to, him being Evan?
Yeah, I think so. And I think in this kind of a scenario here, we've already spoken about, while Eric Anderson it's 100% going to be an All-Canadian this year with the play that we have seen from him. I don't know that they have another All-Canadian on that offensive line for Western this year.
No.
So I don't think you need to like completely change up your defense by any means here. You've been getting home with the four that you have. Maybe you send, an occasional blitz here or there. You send some twists, try to do some different things. Sure. But I think you can kind of keep doing what you have been doing here, get some pressure on Evan, and at the very least, force him out of the pocket. While I still think the world of Evan, even if he is, it's not like we've seen him like be able to make these unbelievable plays on the run, whatever. He's done fine and found his receivers by any means, but I would say he is far more of a threat inside the pocket, where if he is able to step up, he's got great mobility there and he can pick you apart from there. So my game plan is certainly get after Evan, get him uncomfortable, try to rattle his cage a little bit and see if you can't get to him. If he's on his back, he can't be picking you apart, certainly, but he is still pretty good.
Yeah. No, you're right. He's not like your classic like off-platform thrower, and he's never really had to be that guy. And, as we're just thinking more about this Windsor defense, just thinking about a guy like Jason Rashotzi as well at the linebacking core, and just the speed that he plays with. If Evan is to start rolling out, I can just picture, big athletic old 50 just closing ground like a maniac. And of course, one of the other wrinkles with Western becoming a bit more of a passing team this year is how they've actually been getting the ball to Keon a little bit into the backfield. And I do think, and this is where, and I think we are close to having to make our picks here, Tom, because I'm just like, I almost feel like I'm like about to go into a fight. That kind of nerves of being like, oh my gosh, like here we go. I'm so fired up, like what is about to happen. But I do feel like with Evan, and we saw with Evan where, he will take what the defense gives him. Like he's like, and that's what makes him that type of quarterback and that special type of player where he's, we kind of talked about where like the STM connection, the Hillock to Magne Jones, they can do that in their sleep, but seeing him connect with Robertson, with Jamal, and really spreading it out to some of these other guys and knowing that that's always going to be there and hitting some of his guys out of the backfield a little bit more and everything like that, just to kind of, as we've talked about with a number of these teams, making their offense as well-rounded as they can. And I don't think he's going to try and force anything. It's really, to me, like where they falter is if Western can't protect him. That is what this is going to come down to. And for Skelton as well, not that I think Western's going to change up any of their defensive plans to kind of slow them down. We obviously saw big number 55, Von Muhldorfer, back for them last week after we saw him go down with injury against Queens. And he's obviously such a impactful player as far as slowing down opposing teams' run offenses. We've talked about the linebacking core that they have. And, when you have 55 in the middle, clogging up gaps, and those guys can scrape and fill, they're going to be with the best of them. And we've seen that Skelton is comfortable saying, okay, you know what? If you're not going to give me anything big, I will just hit my guys, for 6 to 8 yards on every single play. But in this game, that's the problem with Western, where this could be a game where Windsor ends up controlling possession of the ball for 5 to 6 minutes more and still losing by a score, maybe even 2. Because it's going to get to a point, I think, where Windsor could be doing all the right things, but if Evan is staying clean and he's getting his guys, which he will be, that's the thing certainly for Windsor. You can't be going into this being like, F these guys, we're going to beat the crap out of them. Like, Western's going to get theirs, but you got to get yours. And if you can't get a couple big plays, and if you have to kind of just chunk it, and if Joey Zorn isn't there to help to lead that run game as he does, my concern for Windsor is it's just going to get to a point where there isn't enough time left in the game for them to be able to keep up with Western. Tom, any last thoughts of yours before we bravely put in our picks for this one?
Yeah, you kind of touched on it there, certainly. Like I mentioned before, this Windsor defense is the best in the OUA at getting turnovers. 9 interceptions and I believe 4 fumble recoveries for this team. And that's a massive part of why this defense is so effective and leads into the offense, getting them into great scenarios so that they can go down and convert. And they do convert. This is a very good offense here, certainly. Western does not normally turn the ball over. In 3 years of being the starter, Evan Hillock has thrown 1 interception in the regular season.
What the hell, man?
I know. He's thrown close to 60 touchdown passes. 1 interception. He does not turn the ball over. So in this kind of a scenario here, you have to be ready to play your best game without those intangibles, without the idea that you're going to get a turnover here or there. You very well might. Don't get me wrong. It's not impossible, certainly. It just don't happen very often here. The other side that I will say, Windsor is 5-0, and they earned the hell out of that 5-0. They've really looked sharp. But between McMaster, Guelph, Waterloo, Ottawa, and Queens, I don't think that they've played a team that has executed throughout the entire game. Queens, obviously, with the loss of Alex Vreekin, and credit to Windsor, I don't want to take anything away from them, like I said, but they turned the ball over a total of 5 times. A fumble on the punt, 1 pick by Anthony Leo, and then 3 by Russell Weir here. Obviously, Ottawa, with the loss of Ben Miracle, Ryan LeCandro being in there and really kind of struggling and not really getting things going with that one, haven't really seen that. Waterloo and Guelph, certainly in the earlier part of the season, not as much either. And Mac really struggled as well. And that was the first game of the season, whatever. You are seeing the Western Mustangs in week 6, where they are near the top end of what their capabilities are in terms of executing. The fact that they're going to run a play and the receiving routes are going to be crisp, and the running attack is going to be solid. The blocks are going to be there. This is going to be a team that executes and does not make a lot of mistakes. You are going to have to outplay them in a lot of spaces, because the one or two opportunities that there will be, those going back to last year jump ball moments, you have to capitalize on. You have to, in order to beat these Western Mustangs. They do not lose very often, if at all, in the regular season. And regardless of the fact that they are traveling down to Windsor, they're playing in your backyard, they are still going to give you the one of, if not the toughest challenge that you face all season long. I'm going to go into my picks here because of this factor, that this is the first team that you're going to see that's really going to execute, because Western has been to the mountaintop so many times, and because of the intangibles in terms of Evan Hillock being the star that he is going to be, and this defense for Western coming up with a couple of key takeaways, because I think that they will. Western takes this one.
Oh, man. Yeah. Wow. Honestly, that was great going through the schedule and, thinking about teams giving you their best shots. Because you can say, put the York game aside, you could say, well, Western played Mac. It's like, well, they got Mac's best game they've played all year long as well. Carleton's really good. That Queens game, they almost lost it on the road, but then it was that back and forth. You go to Ottawa, you come home, you're out to Kingston. And I at one point, for those who are just listening to the podcast, I had a quite large smile across my face as I glimpsed at my phone and I saw a text that may or may not have been from the father of Marcus Robinson, someone who I'm rather close with, asking me just the very question, who you picking, Western or Windsor? And it might have influenced me a little bit, but still with no clue about Joey Zorn's status for this game. All those things you said, and just trying to vindicate our beliefs about Evan Hillock and thinking that this will be the game that, not that he hasn't had incredible games, but just this will be one of those moments up with the victory against Queens. Of course, all the incredible playoff performances, his Vanier, and all these other things where we're going to be like, remember when Evan led the Mustangs into Windsor and shut the door on the Windsor Lancers. It's Western on the road, but that was not easy of a conclusion to come to. Oh my goodness, Tom. I am so excited for this game. I can't even flip and believe it. These are the best of the best. And last question before we move on. What are the boys in Waterloo over at University Stadium? So for the Laurier Golden Hawks on their bye week, how are they spending it watching this one, do you think? Like, are they or who are they rooting for?
Oh, I can tell you for sure, Laurier is rooting that Western wins this one, because they want to be 7-0, taking on the Mustangs 7-0 in week 9 going into the playoffs.
Oh, wow.
That's what they want. They want Western at the top of their game so that Laurier can be the ones to knock them off. So I wouldn't be surprised if Laurier is rooting for Western, because they don't want them with that one loss on the season. They want to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. I think that the other thing here as well, just going back to the execution side of things, Western sees the best of the best that every team has to offer every single week. It's Western week. Doesn't matter if the Western Mustangs are off their game, which in the past 10 years has been, they're 6-2 instead of 8-0, which has happened once, by the way, in 10 years. And that was 2013. Oh, sorry. I can't even remember. 2014. Thank you. So yeah, Western sees the best of the OUA each and every single week, regardless of who you go up against. They're used to this.
Oh, man. Now I'm just thinking this, well, Windsor gets their bye after this, or are they emptying the tank versus then for, or pardon me, did I have that? Wait, are both these teams have a bye week next week? What is going on? Anyways, something's going on. I love the take about Laurier cheering for Western to pull this off, to knock them off. But hey, if Windsor pulls it off, Laurier still gets the opportunity to knock them off of their pedestal as well. I am sweating uncomfortably right now under this lovely Dry Fit at the 55 t-shirt that I don't know what our supplies are. You can maybe find some online. Let's go to the final game of the week. Amazingly, the only possible matchup of teams that could come close to, if not surpass, the excitement that we both shared in talking about that last matchup. It is your sole Sunday viewing, October 1st at noon. It is Panda. It says Ottawa at Carleton, but we know in our hearts of heart, this is just the battle for home turf, the battle for bragging rights. I remember talking with guys on both these teams about 3 years ago, asking about their rivalry. And they will tell you, if you're walking around Ottawa and you're a Gigi and you see a guy with Carleton Ravens gear walking on your side of the sidewalk, you cross the street. If you're going to a bar, if you're going to whatever the spot is, and you're a Raven, you see Gigi's there, no, we don't hang out with them. We don't fraternize. We don't look at them. We don't even walk on the same side of the street. We want nothing to do with one another. It'll be at TD Place. I believe so, right? I'm assuming so.
Yes,
it has to be. It always is.
It'll
be, I'm guessing it's going to be CHCH probably giving us the broadcast. It's going to be a packed house. My only hope is students, please just try and get there on time, because a number of times they're still kind of filtering in at like the third quarter and whatnot. And to the, I guess, credit of TD Place security, they're very much having to check a lot of bags with these kids coming in on this amazing day of football. This is truly the highlight of the OUA regular season that we get for certain every year. You brought it up last week. Sort of regardless, irrespective of where the clubs seem to be in their seasons, this is often just an anything can happen type scenario. We have both these teams. What makes it that much more special this year, we have both these teams sitting at 2-2 right now. This is perhaps, without having dug too deep into the research, the most meaningful Panda there's been in the last 10 years in the history of these two clubs being back. There have been years where Carleton was, those teams where they had just so many future CFLers, explosive offenses, just ball hawks on defense, incredible pass rushers, all these types of things. And Ottawa was not necessarily up to that caliber. And of course, years where it was completely flipped. Off the top of my head, like I said, I don't recall a Panda game that was perhaps as meaningful as where we have both these two teams in perhaps similar fashion sitting at 2-2. Tom, what are your sort of thoughts off the jump with Panda 2023 here?
Most definitely. And something that I want to kind of go into as well here is, I know we haven't even really gotten into the Panda itself, but just to give a little bit more of context in terms of how important this game is. After this game, Carleton plays against Queens, which, maybe they find their stuff, whatever, but Queens always gives them a good game in that one. Carleton plays against Queens, then they go to Waterloo, and then they finish off against Guelph. And Guelph certainly seems to be coming on, so that's a tough schedule. You look at this Ottawa GG team. After this game, they go and they play against Laurier, and then the next week, they play against McMaster. That always gives them a tough game. And then they finish it off at Queens. Like, both of these squads, very similar, not only in the teams that they're playing, but the kind of caliber in certain one of these ones. Like, Carleton should beat Waterloo on paper right now. Ottawa should beat McMaster right now. But how important is this Panda game going to be? Sitting at 3-2 versus 2-3 going into the latter part of the season here is such a big deal. This means a lot to both of these squads.
No, I love that you brought that up, because certainly one of the things I was thinking about is the fact that they both still have Queens on their schedule. And the fact that Ottawa is going to be playing Laurier, a team that obviously beat Carleton. And so we can have some situations where, depending on how these teams wrap up their schedules, having that advantage winning the Panda can make or break their season in immensely when it comes down to perhaps a head-to-head opponent that you had success against that, hey, even if you both lost to said, both lose to Queens, maybe you both lose to Laurier. Well, if you're Carleton and you're beating Ottawa or vice versa in this game, that might be the difference between a home playoff game and not. And I mean, I think we're at a point with what we've seen from these clubs where I feel pretty confident that we're looking at 2 playoff teams just based on what we're seeing with Mac. I mean, hey, look, count them up, right? 4 teams missed the playoffs. It's York. It's going to be Toronto. Sorry, Waterloo. And then, hey, take a look behind you, Tom, if you want your answer for number 4 there.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, Unless, of course, as you said, Mac does play Ottawa tough. If they pull that one off, I mean, hey, that'll be, I'll be having some, I'll be questioning a lot of things in my life if that happens. God damn, Greg Knox. Double team sinking D lineman, cut blocking, pulling guard, MF for all these. Oh my gosh. Anyways, we have a football game. Tom, first question, obviously, I think that has to be addressed is the quarterback question for the Ottawa GGs. Obviously saw Josh Jensen or Jansen. I forget which. What was it? Joshua Jansen, or where was his name?
Yeah, Josh Jansen.
Josh Jansen. It was kind of confusing me because we had a Josh Jansen that played D-line with us while I was at Guelph, so I was just like, wait, am I saying the wrong name here for a second? But as we said, despite the outcome of that game, the 50-17 final for Western, in many ways, there were some things he was showing at quarterback that made me feel that, I mean, I said it on that podcast, I'll say it again, if he had that performance or if they had any quarterback with that type of performance when they played Windsor the week before, they win that game. Lecandro, by the numbers, it hasn't been impressive. He's had time with this team now, and let's not forget, he was with this club last year, though he wasn't playing. They had their bye where he was able to perhaps gel that much more. Not knowing what the quarterback position is, thinking about some of the things that make this Carleton team so special, which certainly is that defense and just how they can slow teams down, look no further than, frankly, what they did against Western and Laurier, limiting them below their point averages for the year. Jensen or Lecandro? This isn't really a fair question, but who do you think gives them a better shot in this game? We know that they're going to make their bones in the run game on the back of Amilcar Polk. But quarterback kind of matters a little bit too. From what we saw last week, from what we saw from the rest of the season from these quarterbacks, where do you think they have a better shot in this one?
Well, we have only seen one game with Josh Jansen so far, but I'm going Josh Jansen. I really think that from the chemistry that I saw from him with these receivers going up against Western, of all people, that really impressed me. And I think that I saw better chemistry with Josh in at quarterback than I did at with Lecandro. I think that Josh Jansen gives them a better opportunity to win this game. I really do. And I think that, if Ryan Lecandro is back from injury, it's certainly going to be a tough conversation or a tough decision for these GGs to kind of make here. But based on everything that I've seen, I think Josh Jansen is your better bet.
I think I agree. And in part, I think it's whatever kept Lecandro out of that game. I can't imagine he's perfectly healthy going into this one. And yeah, I think there's a lot of ways you can come off that game and ride the highs of all the positives that we saw. Once again, put away that final score and you add in that piece of, well, for Josh, it's like you are in a god-awful situation going into this game. You're playing the best team in the country on the road, on their homecoming, as our third-string quarterback. Just go out and ball. And frankly, I think that looseness worked to his favor. No shots at Ryan Lecandro, though, of course. But here's the thing, right? We look at Carleton. They obviously are having all their success on the arm of Tristan Lefebvre when it comes on the offense side of the ball. Yeah, the York game, sure, they were able to collectively put together a bit of a run game, but we kind of know what that's more so about. They're kind of the better version of what Mac's been trying to do this year. Sorry, Tom. we cert
Yeah, that's not a hot take.
no. We certainly know how great Ottawa's defensive front has been this year. You know, we go back to that Windsor game, how they were getting after, well, slowing down the rushing attack that they have. So I say all that and starting to be to start for starters to say that like I don't even know if Carleton's even going to bother trying to run the ball in this game because I can't envision them really moving the ball on the ground against Ottawa. The numbers, if you look at Ottawa, don't necessarily back that up in the grand scheme of things, but the way they play, I do really love how they can slow down runners. Once again, injuries though. Go back to that Windsor game, some of the guys that we saw go out and some of the guys we didn't see return against Western that specifically are factors in terms of slowing down passing attacks. This is where, as you know, the world's biggest Gigi fan sitting over here, I am very nervous because I kind of feel like Tristan Lefebvre on the biggest stage in Ottawa football might have the game of games. I'm thinking like 350 to 400 yards, perhaps, if we're still missing some of those guys in the secondary and linebacking core for Ottawa. And if they also say, they being Carleton, say, yeah, Tristan, you're throwing 40 to 50 times in this game. From that standpoint of how Carleton might be attacking Ottawa even more so in the past, given that they might just say, like I said, this Ottawa defense up front, they're pretty stout. We can't run the ball on our best days. Whatever. We are just completely leaning into what we do best, and we're going to take advantage of some of those injuries. Where do you see that working out in this game?
Oh, I certainly think that it's exactly what you said. I think that already, even if all things are considered equal, Corey Grant is always going to be more so leaning towards an air raid style offense than he is with a running, a pounding on the ground kind of game. And I do want to just quickly say, I love the fact that while you were talking about Ottawa, you said we, and when you were talking about Carleton, you said they. You are in this game, man. You are suiting up for these GGs in this week. Oh God, I love it. But yeah, no, I think that exactly like you said, I think Lefebvre comes on in the biggest game of his season here, and he really does his thing. I've loved what I've seen so far from Hunter Brown, from Tristan Reddy, even Kasim Ferdinand is still that special player that he can go off at any point here. And I think he probably picked a pretty good game to potentially go off against their biggest rival and arguably the best rivalry in all of OUA football between these two teams. So yeah, I think that this is going to be a very tough matchup for these Ottawa GGs, especially given the injuries that we've seen in the defensive secondary specifically. That front four for them on the defensive line is outstanding for Ottawa. They really showcased that when they played against Windsor, and they limited Joey Zorin, Christopher John, and Wegby Mumbo all to under 70 yards each player.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see Lefebvre, I think, pressured more in this game than he has in previous games here, and like having to kind of roll out a little bit more, do whatever else. But based on everything that we've seen, I think he's a pretty athletic dude, and I don't know if that really affects him all that much. I really would not be surprised to see him go for 350, 400 in the air here.
Well, and if they are moving him out, you know, we talked about we brought up his name in kind of the DPOY conversation. Ottawa has an absolute monster in Maxi Carbonneau in the middle, who I don't doubt can be not only flushing Lefebvre from the pocket, but also just chasing him down after the fact as well. Yeah, you mentioned those names, Hatchie and Reddy and all these guys in that receiving core, and then yeah. Like to boot, like it's crazy because like we said, this is a Carleton team who's lost, albeit, but played Western and Laurier this season, but they're only giving up 17 points a game. Like it's bananas to just how good this team is. And yes, I appreciate you calling me out on that, but like honestly, like and on the flip side, right? Like of on the flip side of the Lefebvre going off for massive numbers, which, as we're saying, could really see happening. Like Amilcar Polk, like once again, I could see this being the game of games for him. But then it makes me kind of think about some of my commentary with the Windsor Western game we just talked about, where I don't think, not that I don't think, Ottawa cannot keep up. I think whichever of these quarterbacks they have, whether it's Lecandro or whether it's Jansen, with what Carleton can do passing the ball. That's certainly not the case. And yeah, they can run with the best of them, and we obviously see that Amilcar Polk can bust massive runs to be able to get you scores on the ground fairly quickly, which, obviously it's usually easier to score faster in the pass game than on the run game and things like this. But, even still, I mean, it's a middle of the pack rush defense for the Carleton Ravens. I'm still kind of coming to this thought where Ottawa, being this ground and pound team with the best running back in the province, there may just not be enough time for them to be able to put up points to keep up with what Carleton very likely could do here. And then you add in the fact that with guys like Kassim Ferdinand, Ottman Braun returning kicks for Carleton and how explosive they can be. Obviously, Ottawa's got Charles Asselin, who is a great returner for them too. Yeah, I framed it as a we and a they, but I'll be honest, and like whatever other takes you have as well, I'm leaning with Carleton on this one. I do think that they'll pick it up. There's the magic of Panda in the air. Like there's the possibility of just like a massive Polk game, and whichever quarterback we see, who knows. But all things certainly point, and because once again, you add in some of those injuries on the GG's defense, certainly this thing right now, from what we've been seeing of late, points heavily on the Carleton Ravens side.
Most definitely. I am in lockstep with you on this one as well. Even I think the recipe for success for Ottawa here is having Amilcar Polk go off, and that means like 150 to 200 yards on the ground, a couple of touchdowns or whatever. But the other thing you have to think of, even if best case scenario, Polk does that and he goes off and he scores a couple of touchdowns, whatever, the better offense to come back from being down is Carleton. Air raid offense, being able to gain some really serious yardage pretty quickly and score, it certainly leads them a little bit better in order to, in the hypothetical scenario, come back and get ahead of this one. On the other side of things, Carleton gets up early and they get up by a couple scores. Suddenly you can't afford to chew up the clock and really rush with Polk, and you have to rely on the quarterback play. And regardless if it's Lecandro or Jansen, it's not a hot take to say the advantage in this one from a quarterback play goes to Carleton. So you're going to have to figure out some kind of a way in order to make sure that you can still get your fantastic receivers that Ottawa has involved in the game in creative ways if you have to, whether it's quick passes, swing plays, or even trying to go over the top and try to catch Carleton off guard, because you've got two quarterbacks that are technically backups and you don't think that they have that deep ball threat or whatever. So I think that this, on paper, Carleton is better suited for this game in order to score often and score quickly and get Ottawa out of their comfort zone, rather than Ottawa is by trying to run the ball and get forward from there. And that, along with a laundry list of other things, is why I'm going with the Ravens to win this one.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, or great points in there. I mean, I'm looking at the box score though from the Windsor game, because as much as you say that like the way that Ottawa plays, it makes it tough for them to come back from behind. And we look at that one, and going back to that conversation in the Western and Windsor game of who's going to kind of go to the, the secret plan X first. I mean, not that it's a surprise, not that people shouldn't know that Matt Mahler is a quarterback as well. They went to the wide receiver pass, going Lecandro to Mahler to Gendron for the 75-yard touchdown in that game, right? couple misplays by the Lancers, a 49-yard run for Polk to score one of those touchdowns as well, right? So that explosive play there to help them claw back in that game. And what's kind of amazing is that you say that this isn't the matchup for them to try and come back. Like, Windsor surely is the team that you shouldn't be able to come back on, and they still actually managed to do it.
Fair enough.
But it involved using that trickery that, like, once again, like, it is like, I would not have wanted to be in that film meeting for Windsor going over that play of being like, we played this team last year and that guy was the backup quarterback. How did we even let Gendron not just score, but the way he was so wide open on that play? Like, that was atrocious. Polk busting the big run. Hey, we know he's due for at least one of those big runs a game, but as much as it pains me to say only as a big GG supporter, but I love this Carleton Ravens team this year. I feel like like having to pick between like mom and dad here right now of the Carleton Ravens and the GGs right now with how these two teams are playing. And you know what? Maybe some of those guys, like maybe our guy Harnour will be back for them, and maybe Crookshanks will be back, and all these things, and Kevin Victome will get a pick six, and Charles Aslan will get a punt return touchdown. All these things can happen. It's certainly far from inconceivable. Like, the road to victory for the GGs is there. It absolutely is, especially on Panda any day more than others. Just like we said, not knowing the status of some of those guys in the secondary linebacking core for them, with how Lefebvre is playing, thinking that he might especially take opportunities to be throwing the ball against them, and not knowing the quarterback situation for the GGs right now. It's, like I said, yeah, all things in this one, from where we sit right now, looking at it, point the Ravens' way. It's Carleton in the 2023 Panda. Last words to you, Tom.
You struggle more picking against your GGs than you do against your own Griffins, man.
Yeah, that is factual. That is correct. That is correct.
Oh man. Yeah, I think we are slated once again for another phenomenal week of OUA football. And while it is once again very disappointing that there are so many games on Saturday, Zach and I often go back and forth with, hey, look at my setup here where I've got 4 games playing at one time. I can tell you confidently here, on Saturday, if I do get a chance to watch this game live, because like Zach alluded to, the Sunday technically is my anniversary, but we got stuff kind of planned throughout. If I get a chance to watch a game live, I'm only going one screen, Windsor Western, with our guy Brett Hedges on the call here once again. But yeah, I cannot wait. Western, Windsor, Ottawa, Carleton, Panda Game, Battle of the Undefeateds. What more could you want?
I couldn't want much more, and I don't think I could provide a better outro for the show, Tom, because you just did it right there. So 100%, however you're enjoying OUA football this weekend, we hope you have a blast. If you're at any of these games live, enjoy the heck out of it. If you're at Panda, have the blast of all blasts. Tom, as far as your anniversary, of course, I'll wish you a happy anniversary when we get to the date, but for the sake of the podcast, everything like that, happy anniversary to you. Thank and you. Your better half. Hey, I'll say this too. Ottawa's beautiful this time of year, so there's nothing wrong with a little anniversary trip down to the nation's capital. But those are our games for the weekend. Those are our thoughts on all of them. We've crossed the 2-hour mark on this podcast, so in total, that's about 48 hours worth of podcasting that these two schlubs are giving you in a single week, all for the price of $0. Just perhaps a little tune in, follow, share with your friends, and send us your comments, questions, and feedback at all times to help us keep supporting the OUA in the way that we do. So enjoy this weekend. There will be 2 remaining undefeated teams after this one. Who will fall between Windsor and Western? Who will win the Panda Game? Will Mac get back on their stuff? Will Guelph keep rolling in that 30 front against the Waterloo team that runs the ball really well? Who the heck's going to be at quarterback for Queens? And so many more questions that we'll no doubt have some answers for, but like always, there'll be more questions that come with those answers. But we'll be there to talk to you about all those questions next week at the 55. And scene.